I thought I knew my wife after 18 years of marriage. I was wrong about everything. The night she came home reeking of another man's cologne and screamed, "I don't need your permission," changed my life forever. But what I discovered next shattered everything I believed about my family. 2 DNA tests, stolen money, and a father-in-law's shocking confession revealed a web of lies that went back decades. My children weren't who I thought they were, but they were about to show me what real family actually means. My name is Dwayne Hollister. I'm 46 years old, and I run a hunting dog breeding farm outside Millfield, Tennessee. Been training German short-haired pointers and Brittany Spaniels for hunters across 3 states. It's honest work, the kind that builds character and keeps a man grounded. At least, that's what I thought until my world exploded on a Tuesday night in October. Marlene came home at 11:47 p.m. I know the exact time because I was sitting in my recliner, watching the dogs pace restlessly in their kennels through the window. They always knew when something was wrong before I did. Smart animals, dogs. Smarter than their owners sometimes. She walked through that front door like she owned the place and owed nobody an explanation. Her coat hit the hardwood floor with a thud. Not hung up, not draped over a chair, just dropped like trash. The smell hit me next. Cologne. Not mine. Something expensive and foreign that made my stomach turn. "Where have you been, Marlene?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. After 18 years, you learn to pick your battles. She grabbed a beer from the fridge, popped it open, and took a long pull before looking at me. "Out with friends," she said, like that explained everything. "Which friends?" "Dorian asked where you were when he got home from basketball practice. Zelda wanted help with her science project." That's when her face changed. The mask slipped, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Pure contempt. "I'm not a child, Dwayne," she shouted, slamming the beer bottle on the counter. "I don't need your permission to go out. I don't need to report my every move to you like some prisoner." The words hung in the air like smoke. In the silence that followed, I could hear one of my prize bitches whimpering in the kennel. Even the dogs felt the tension. I stood up slowly, my hand steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. 18 years of marriage, 2 kids, a business we built together, and this is what it came down to. "Fine," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. "Go. But if that's how you really feel, then don't come back." She froze halfway to the stairs, her hand gripping the banister. For a moment, I thought she might apologize, might realize what she'd just done to our family. Instead, she looked over her shoulder and said, "Maybe I won't." 20 minutes later, I heard her car backing out of the driveway. I'm still sitting here, watching those empty kennels, wondering how a man's life can change so completely in the span of a conversation. The sun came up whether I wanted it to or not. Funny how the world keeps spinning, even when yours has just stopped. I've been awake all night, sitting on the porch with my old hound Rex, watching the driveway like Marlene might change her mind and come rolling back with some explanation that made sense. She didn't. By 6 a.m., I had to face reality. The kids would be up soon, wanting breakfast and answers I didn't have. Dorian had early football practice, and Zelda needed to be at school by 8. Life doesn't pause for personal disasters. I was frying eggs when Dorian came downstairs, his hair still messy from sleep. At 16, he was already taller than me and built like the linebacker he was. Smart kid too, with his mother's quick wit and, thankfully, none of her recent attitude. "Dad, where's Mom?" Dorian asked, grabbing a piece of toast. Her car wasn't in the driveway when I got up. I flipped his eggs, buying myself a few seconds. "She left early this morning. Had some things to take care of." It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. How do you tell your son that his mother might not be coming home? Zelda bounded into the kitchen like she always did, full of 12-year-old energy. She had her science project in her hands, something about plant growth that she'd been working on for weeks. "Daddy, can you help me finish this?" Mom was supposed to help last night, but she never came to my room, Zelda said, spreading papers across the kitchen table. Dorian caught my eye over her head. He was old enough to read between the lines, old enough to know that married couples don't just disappear without explanation. "Sure, sweetheart," I said, setting Dorian's breakfast in front of him. "Let's take a look." As Zelda explained her project about how different fertilizers affected tomato plants, I found myself thinking about my own marriage. Maybe that was the problem. I've been too much fertilizer, too much attention, too much caring. Some plants, apparently, prefer neglect. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a split second, my heart jumped, thinking it might be Marlene. Instead, it was my business partner, Jake, asking if I could take his morning training session. One of his students had an early driving test. "Dad, you're not listening," Zelda said, tugging on my sleeve. "Sorry, baby girl. Tell me again about the nitrogen levels." But as she talked, I was doing math in my head. 18 years of marriage, 2 kids, a mortgage, business responsibilities. How does a man untangle all of that? How do you explain to a 12-year-old that her mother might be throwing it all away for whatever was in that cologne bottle? Dorian finished his breakfast and grabbed his gym bag. "Dad," he said quietly, "if you need to talk or anything." The kid was trying to be the man of the house, and he wasn't even old enough to vote. That hit me harder than Marlene's words had. "I'm good, son. Just focus on school and football. Let me worry about everything else." After they left, I sat in the kitchen staring at Marlene's empty coffee cup, still sitting where she'd left it 2 days ago, back when I thought we were just going through a rough patch. I had dogs to feed and students to teach. Life was going to keep moving whether I was ready or not. 3 days passed without a word from Marlene. 3 days of me making breakfast, packing lunches, and pretending everything was normal while my gut twisted itself into knots. The dogs sensed something was wrong. They kept whining and pacing, looking toward the house like they expected her to walk through the door. On Thursday evening, while helping Zelda with her math homework, my phone rang. Unknown number. "Is this Dwayne Hollister?" The voice was male, older, with a slight drawl. "Speaking." "Sir, my name is Harold Brennan. I'm Marlene's father. I think we need to talk." My blood went cold. Harold lived 2 states over in Alabama, and we rarely spoke except at holidays. For him to call meant something serious was happening. "What's going on, Harold?" I asked, stepping into the garage where the kids couldn't hear. "Marlene showed up here yesterday," Harold said, his voice tight with anger. "Came driving up with some story about needing space to think. But Dwayne, she wasn't alone. The wrench I'd been holding slipped from my fingers and clattered on the concrete floor. She had a man with her," Harold continued. "Tall fellow, expensive clothes, driving a black Escalade with Tennessee plates. When I asked who he was, she got defensive, said it was none of my business. I leaned against my workbench, feeling like someone had punched me in the chest. What did you tell her?" "I told her she could stay one night, but not with him under my roof. Not while she's still married to you, and has 2 children at home." She got mad, called me old-fashioned, and said I didn't understand modern relationships. Harold's voice broke slightly. "Dwayne, I raised that girl better than this. I don't know what's gotten into her, but she's not the daughter I know. She left this morning, said she was going to figure things out. After I hung up, I sat in my truck for 20 minutes, staring at the kennels. 23 breeding pairs of the finest hunting dogs in 3 states, and I couldn't even keep my own family together. While I walked back into the house, Dorian was waiting in the kitchen. At 16, he had developed an unsettling ability to read situations. "Dad, was that about Mom?" he asked. I looked at my son, my boy who was trying so hard to be a man, and decided he deserved some truth. "Your mother is staying with your grandfather for a few days. She's working through some things." Dorian nodded slowly. "Is she coming back?" "I don't know, son. I honestly don't know." By Saturday morning, I'd made a decision. Sitting around waiting for answers wasn't my style. If Marlene wanted to blow up our family, she could do it, but I wasn't going to let her do it in the dark. I called my lawyer, Rick Sullivan, a good man who'd handled our business contracts for years. When I explained the situation, he was quiet for a long moment. "Dwayne, I hate to ask this, but have you checked your finances lately?" Rick asked. "What do you mean?" "Joint accounts, business accounts, anything she has access to. When marriages go sideways, money has a way of disappearing first." After we hung up, I drove to the bank. What I found there made my hands shake. Our joint savings account, the one with $43,000 we'd been building for Dorian's college and Zelda's future, had been cleaned out. Empty except for 87 cents. The withdrawal had been made Tuesday morning, hours before a fight. She planned this. I called Rick back immediately. "She took everything," I said. "How much?" 43 grand. Plus I need to check the business accounts." "Dwayne, listen to me carefully. Go home and gather every financial document you can find. Bank statements, credit cards, business records, everything. Bring them to my office Monday morning. If she's planning to leave permanently, she's probably been preparing for weeks. That afternoon, while the kids were out, I turned our home office upside down. What I found painted a picture I've been too blind to see. Credit card statements showing charges at restaurants I'd never been to. Hotel reservations in cities where she claimed to be at business conferences. A second cell phone bill for a number I didn't recognize. The worst discovery was a folder hidden behind our tax returns. Inside were printouts of apartment listings, all in Nashville, 2 hours away. The dates on the printouts went back 3 months. 3 months of planning to abandon her family. When Dorian came home from football practice, he found me sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, trying to piece together the timeline of my wife's betrayal. "Dad, what's all this?" he asked. "Just trying to understand some things, son." Dorian sat down across from me. "You know, a few weeks ago, I saw Mom talking to some guy in the parking lot after one of my games. I didn't think much of it then, but he was driving a black SUV. My heart stopped. What did they look like together? Like they knew each other really well." She was laughing at something he said, and when she saw me coming, she stepped away from him real quick. That night, I call Harold back. "I need to know everything about this man she brought to your house. Everything you remember." "Well," Harold said slowly. He introduced himself as Garrison. Said he was in real estate development. Wore a wedding ring, if that tells you anything. It told me everything I needed to know. My wife wasn't just cheating. She was helping destroy someone else's family, too. Monday morning brought a phone call that changed everything. I was in the kennel feeding my breeding pairs when Rick Sullivan called with news that hit me like a sledgehammer. "Dwayne, I've been doing some digging on this Garrison Wells character," Rick said. "Turns out he's got quite a history with your wife. They knew each other in college. And there's something else you need to know." I leaned against the fence post, watching my German short-haired pointer chaser pups around the yard. "What kind of something else?" "The dates don't add up right. Garrison was in Tennessee 16 years ago, right around the time Dorian was conceived. And Dwayne, there are some physical similarities between Dorian and this man that are hard to ignore." My knees went weak. "What are you saying, Rick?" "I'm saying you might want to consider a paternity test. For your own peace of mind, if nothing else." The phone slipped from my hands and clattered on the concrete. 16 years of raising a boy I loved like my own son, and now this. I picked up the phone with shaking fingers. "Rick, are you sure about this timeline?" "I've got Garrison's employment records. He worked construction in Nashville from 2007 to 2008. That's when Marlene was supposedly on that business trip where she claimed Dorian was conceived. That evening, I sat Dorian down in the workshop. At 16, he was old enough to handle hard truths, and God knows there were enough of them flying around. "Son, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that no matter what the answer is, you're my boy. Always have been, always will be." Dorian looked up from the engine he was helping me rebuild. "Dad, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "There's a possibility that your biological father might not be me. I need to know for sure, for legal reasons with your mother's situation." Dorian set down his wrench and stared at me for a long moment. Then he did something that made me proud to call him my son, regardless of DNA. "Dad," he said quietly, "I don't care who donated the genetics. You're the one who taught me to throw a football, who stayed up all night when I had pneumonia, who came to every game, even when work was crazy. That makes you my father." The next day, we went to the clinic together. 3 days later, the results came back. Dorian wasn't my biological son, but when I told him, he just shrugged and said, "Doesn't change anything, Dad. You're still stuck with me." That kid had more backbone at 16 than most men twice his age. However, this revelation meant Marlene had been lying to me for 16 years. Every birthday party, every Christmas morning, every proud moment watching Dorian play football, all of it built on deception. Rick called that evening with more news. "Dwayne, with these paternity results, we can file for fraud. Marlene took money under false pretenses, claiming Dorian was your biological child. Plus, Garrison has been paying nothing in child support all these years." "What does that mean?" "It means we're going after both of them. Hard." 2 weeks later, Marlene finally came home. I was expecting her. Rick had gotten word through his contacts that she was running out of money and places to hide. Garrison had apparently cut her loose when his own wife started making legal threats. I was sitting on the front porch when she pulled into the driveway Thursday evening, driving a car I didn't recognize. She looked different, thinner, older, like someone who'd been living on nerves and bad decisions. The dogs started barking when they saw her, but it wasn't the welcome home bark they used to give. Even they knew something was wrong. "Hello, Dwayne," she said, walking up the porch steps like she still belonged here. "Marlene," I replied, not getting up from my chair. "Kids are at Harold's for the week." Figured this conversation was better without them hearing it. She flinched at the mention of her father. "Daddy told you, didn't he? He told me you brought your boyfriend to meet the family." Real classy touch. She sat down on the porch swing, the same one where we used to sit and talk about our dreams. "I suppose you hate me now." Hate's a strong word. Disappointed? Betrayed? Those fit better. "Dwayne, you have to understand. I felt trapped, like I was suffocating in this life. Garrison made me feel alive again." I pulled out the DNA test results and set them on the table between us. "Speaking of Garrison, when were you planning to tell me about Dorian?" Her face went white as she read the papers. When did you? 16 years, Marlene. 16 years of me loving that boy, raising him, being his father in every way that mattered. And you let me believe he was mine. "P.I.S. yours," she said, standing up suddenly. "Biology doesn't make a father." "You're right about that," I said, my voice steady. "But lies make a liar, and theft makes a thief. Where's our money, Marlene?" She started crying then, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of someone who'd been caught and was looking for sympathy. I needed to start over. I needed to feel like I had options. At the expense of your children's future? At the expense of 16 years of deception? She wiped her eyes and looked at me with something I'd never seen before, genuine fear. "What do you want from me, Dwayne?" I stood up and walked to the porch railing, looking out at the kennels where my dogs were settling down for the night. Honest animals, loyal animals, animals that never betrayed the hand that fed them. "I want you gone," I said quietly. "I want you to sign over full custody of Zelda. I want you to stay away from my family, and I want you to face the consequences of what you've done. And if I don't..." I turned to look at her, and she must have seen something in my eyes that made her step backward. "Then Rick Sullivan, and I will make sure everyone in this county knows exactly what kind of woman you really are. Your choice." She left an hour later, and this time, I knew she wasn't coming back. 3 months later, Marlene did exactly what I expected her to do. She came back fighting. But this time, she brought lawyers and a sob story that would have made Hollywood proud. I was training a young German short-haired pointer in the field when Rick Sullivan called with news that made my blood pressure spike. "Dwayne, Marlene filed for custody of Zelda yesterday," Rick said. "She's claiming you're an unfit father who's been alienating the children against her." I stopped mid-throw, the training dummy falling to the ground. "On what grounds?" "She says you've been drinking heavily since she left, that you're emotionally unstable, and that you've been filling the kids' heads with lies about her. She wants supervised visitation with Dorian and full custody of Zelda." The audacity of it hit me like a slap. After abandoning her family, stealing our savings, and carrying on a 16-year deception about Dorian's paternity, she had the nerve to claim I was the problem. "Rick, please tell me you have a plan. Better than that. I have Harold on our side. He's willing to testify about her bringing Garrison to his house, about her behavior, about everything he witnessed. Plus, we have the financial records showing she stole $43,000. That evening, I sat the kids down for what had become our regular family meeting. Zelda, now 13 and sharper than a tack, listened intently as I explained the situation. "Mom wants me to live with her," Zelda asked, her voice small. "That's what she's asking the court, sweetheart." Dorian, who'd grown even more protective since learning about his paternity, stood up and started pacing. "Dad, this is insane. She abandoned us. She stole our money. How can a judge even consider this?" "Because the legal system tries to keep families together when possible," I explained. "But Zelda, I need you to know that whatever happens, we're going to fight this." Zelda looked at me with her mother's eyes, but thankfully, her grandfather's moral compass. "Dad, I don't want to live with Mom. I want to stay here with you and Dorian. This is my home." The court hearing was scheduled for the following month. Rick advised me to document everything: my daily routine with the kids, my business records showing financial stability, character references from clients and neighbors. But Marlene had been busy too. She'd rented a nice apartment in town, gotten a job at a local insurance office, and was presenting herself as a reformed woman who'd made mistakes but learned from them. The night before the hearing, Harold called with unexpected news. "Dwayne, I found something in Marlene's old room. Letters from Garrison going back years. I mean years, son. This affair didn't start recently." "How far back?" "Based on these letters, they've been in contact since before Zelda was born. There's one here from when Zelda was a baby, where Garrison talks about visiting and seeing his girls." My hands went cold. "Harold, are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying you might want to get another DNA test, this time for Zelda." The next morning, walking into that courthouse, I carried with me not just the weight of fighting for my daughter, but the possibility that she might not be mine either. But as Zelda squeezed my hand and whispered, "I love you, Daddy," I knew that biology was just science. Family was something deeper. "Ready for this, Dad?" Dorian asked, straightening his tie. "With you two by my side, I'm ready for anything." The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, but the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marlene sat with her lawyer at one table, looking like the picture of reformed motherhood in a conservative blue dress and minimal makeup. I sat with Rick and both kids, who had insisted on being present despite Rick's advice that they wait outside. Judge Patricia Morrison, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the files before addressing the court. "This is a custody modification hearing regarding Zelda Hollister, age 13, Judge Morrison announced. Mrs. Hollister is seeking primary custody. Mr. Hollister opposes this motion." Marlene's lawyer, a slick-talking man named Barrett, painted a picture of a woman who'd made mistakes but was ready to rebuild her relationship with her daughter. He spoke about temporary separation, emotional healing, and second chances. Then it was Rick's turn, and he came out swinging. "Your Honor, the plaintiff didn't leave temporarily. She abandoned her family after stealing $43,000 from joint accounts intended for the children's education. She conducted an affair lasting over a decade and defrauded Mr. Hollister regarding the paternity of their son." Barrett objected, claiming the paternity issue was irrelevant to Zelda's custody, but Rick was ready. "Your Honor, this morning we received additional DNA test results. Zelda Hollister is also not Mr. Hollister's biological daughter." The courtroom went silent. Marlene's face turned ashen, and Zelda grabbed my hand so tight, I thought she might break my fingers. Rick continued, "Despite learning that neither child is biologically his, Mr. Hollister has continued to love, support, and raise them as his own. Meanwhile, the plaintiff has had minimal contact with either child for 4 months." Judge Morrison looked directly at Marlene. "Mrs. Hollister, are you aware of these paternity results?" Marlene's lawyer whispered frantically in her ear before she answered. "Your Honor, biology doesn't determine parenthood. Both children have always considered my client their mother, but apparently not their father," Rick interjected. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Mrs. Hollister has been deceiving Mr. Hollister about both children's paternity for over 13 years. That's when Harold stepped up to testify. At 72, Marlene's father commanded respect just by walking into the room. His testimony was devastating. "Judge, I raised my daughter to have values and integrity," Harold said, his voice shaking with emotion. "What she's done to this family, to these children, goes against everything I taught her. When she brought her paramour to my home, expecting me to accept him while she was still married, I knew she'd lost her way completely. But the moment that sealed Marlene's fate came when Judge Morrison asked to speak with Zelda privately in her chambers. 20 minutes later, they returned, and Zelda walked straight to my side. Judge Morrison's decision was swift and final. After reviewing all evidence and speaking with the minor child involved, this court finds that Mrs. Hollister's actions demonstrate a pattern of deception, financial fraud, and abandonment that makes her unsuitable for primary custody. Full custody of Zelda Hollister is awarded to Mr. Hollister, with supervised visitation rights granted to Mrs. Hollister. As we left the courthouse, Zelda hugged me tight and whispered, "Daddy, you're still my daddy, right? Even with the DNA stuff." I knelt down and looked into her eyes that might not share my genetics, but definitely share my stubborn streak. "Zelda, sweetheart, I've been your daddy since the day you were born, and I'll be your daddy until the day I die. DNA can't change that." Dorian put his arm around both of us. "Besides, Zelda, if Dad can handle 2 teenagers who aren't even related to him, he's basically a superhero." For the first time in months, We all laughed together. Real laughter, the kind that comes from surviving something terrible and coming out stronger on the other side. 1 year after the courthouse victory, life had taken on a rhythm I never expected but had grown to treasure. The dog breeding business was thriving. Word had spread about the trainer who'd stood up for his family, and hunters from across the Southeast were bringing their business to someone they respected. Dorian, now 17, had become my right-hand man with the dogs. Despite learning he wasn't my biological son, our bond had only grown stronger. He'd earned a football scholarship to the University of Tennessee and planned to study veterinary medicine. "Dad, Duke's puppies are ready for their first field training," Dorian announced, leading the German short-haired pointer litter into the training yard. "Want me to start them on basic commands?" "Go ahead, son. You've got better instincts with these dogs than I had at your age." Zelda, now 14, had developed into a remarkable young woman. The DNA revelation had affected her differently than Dorian. She'd become even more protective of our family unit, as if she needed to prove her place in it through loyalty rather than genetics. "Daddy, I made the honor roll again," she said, bouncing into the kennel area with her report card. "And Coach Williams wants me to try out for varsity basketball next year." "That's my girl," I said, pulling her into a hug. "Your grandfather Harold's going to be so proud when I tell him." Harold had become a regular fixture in our lives since the court case. At 73, he'd moved closer to help with the kids and had become the grandfather figure they'd always deserved. His presence filled a gap that Marlene's absence had created. The biggest surprise had come 6 months earlier when I met Sarah, a veterinarian who'd started bringing her own hunting dogs to me for training. She was a widow with 2 teenage sons, and our friendship had slowly developed into something deeper. "Mr. Hollister," she'd said during one of our training sessions, "you've got a gift with these animals. And from what I can see, you're pretty good with kids, too." Sarah understood the complexities of blended families and second chances. She never tried to replace anyone or rush anything. She just brought laughter back into our house and showed Dorian and Zelda that good people still existed in the world. "Dad," Dorian said as we watched the puppies retrieve their first training dummy, "are you happy? I mean really happy?" I looked around at my kennels full of champion bloodlines. My son who'd chosen to call me Dad despite everything. My daughter who fought to stay with me. And the life we'd built from the ashes of betrayal. "Son, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, with exactly the people I'm supposed to be with. Biology doesn't make a family. Love and commitment do. And we've got plenty of both." That evening, as we sat on the porch watching the dogs settle down for the night, I realized something profound. Marlene's betrayal hadn't destroyed my family. It had revealed who my real family was. 2 years later, I stood in the same courthouse where I'd fought for custody of Zelda, but this time for a happier occasion. Sarah and I were getting married, and Judge Morrison, who'd overseen our custody case, had agreed to perform the ceremony. The wedding was small, just our combined families, Harold, Rick Sullivan, and a few close friends. Dorian, now 19 and home from college, served as my best man. Zelda, 16 and beautiful, was Sarah's maid of honor. "Dad," Dorian said as we waited for the ceremony to begin, "I want you to know something. Finding out you weren't my biological father was the best thing that ever happened to me." I looked at him, confused. "How's that, son?" "Because it proved that you chose to love me every single day for 17 years. That's worth more than any DNA test could ever show." The ceremony was simple and honest, just like the relationship Sarah and I had built. When Judge Morrison pronounced us husband and wife, our 5 kids cheered louder than any crowd I'd ever heard. At the reception in Harold's backyard, surrounded by the people who mattered most, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought us here. Marlene's betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but had also cleared the path for something better. Harold, now 75 and still sharp as a tack, raised his glass for a toast. "To my son-in-law Dwayne, who showed my granddaughter what a real man looks like, and to Sarah, who was smart enough to recognize a good thing when she saw it." Later that evening, as Sarah and I danced to an old country song, she whispered in my ear, "You know what I love most about you, Dwayne Hollister?" "What's that, Mrs. Hollister?" "You never let someone else's bad choices define who you were. You just kept being the man you were raised to be." As the evening wound down, I looked around at our celebration. Dorian was teaching Sarah's youngest son how to train puppies. Zelda was showing the older boys her basketball trophies. Harold was telling stories that made everyone laugh. This was what family looked like. Not perfect, not traditional, but real and honest and built to last. 6 months later, we received word that Marlene had been released from minimum security prison after serving 18 months for fraud. She'd written a letter asking if she could see Zelda, but my daughter's response had been swift and final. "Dad, I don't need to see her," Zelda had said. "I've got everything I need right here." As I write this, sitting on my porch watching my dogs and my family, I want other men going through what I went through to know something important. Betrayal doesn't have to be the end of your story. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a better chapter. The woman who was supposed to love me chose to destroy our family instead. But in doing so, she revealed the family that was meant to be stronger, more honest, and built on something that can't be shaken by lies or broken by betrayal. DNA doesn't make a father. Time doesn't make a marriage. And biology doesn't make a family. Love does. Commitment does. And sometimes, surviving the worst thing that can happen to you shows you just how strong you really are.